Welcome back to Unit 3, Part 2, as we journey through our listening songs for Music 28. The 70s has a lot of fusions, music with two or more styles fusing together to create really a whole new subgenre. In prior decades, there was a lot more separation between country and jazz and even classical music. And the 70s becomes a really exciting time for fused styles. The first couple styles we're going to talk about are in the country category, country rock and southern rock. And there's a slight difference between them depending on which rock scholar you study from. The Eagles are in that category, and their song Lion Eyes depicts and expresses a lot of those interesting fusion elements. Two different styles at the same time. There's clearly a rock band being played, but they also use elements like steel guitar, which we had from Unit 1, or sometimes called pedal steel guitar. The song structures from the 60s, about mid 60s on to the present day, really start to evolve pretty dramatically and get quite complicated. So occasionally I'll list the song structure, extended verse chorus form with intro and coda, because the traditional verse chorus that we heard back with Maybelline and Chuck Berry isn't really used quite as bit at this point, especially in the fused styles. We might encounter it more when we get into the early days of punk rock. Rather than a heavy, hard-hitting backbeat that's part of rock, we have more of a subtle one in Lion Eyes. You can hear, as you listen to it, the drummer hitting the sticks on the rim of the drums in sort of a country, almost a danceable style. But the subject matter is also bridging both categories. It's not happy love like a pop song might be. It's about infidelity, about a young woman who married a man for all of his riches, but her eyes give her away. She's got lion eyes. So take a moment and pause. Load up Lion Eyes by the Eagles from 1975 and follow along and see if you can hear some of those elements. Come on back when you're done. All right, welcome back. This next group in the category is actually a southern rock band, the Allman Brothers, based in the southern part of the United States, in the Alabama and southern Bible Belt, as they say, area. And the distinction between country rock and southern rock is constantly being argued. But southern rock generally has a little more of a blues emphasis, particularly in this band's example. So it's a combination, as I mentioned in the slide, of blues, soul, and a little bit of country. Has a little harder edge sound than the Eagles, probably slightly less mainstream, depending on which part of the country we're talking about. And the Allman Brothers were known for their twin lead guitar work and a sound in their drummer that was very similar. They were incredibly versatile and accomplished musicians, and every single member of the band was. That twin guitar situation, that lead, is very difficult because you can have people battling who's going to get the lead, who's not. And when you play together, sometimes very difficult to sync up who's going to play some harmony of the lead and who's going to play the lead. That also will influence, believe it or not, heavy metal. One particular heavy metal band that we'll get to in Unit 4 that was inspired by Southern rock. One wouldn't think that those two go together. We talked about honky tonk piano in Unit 1, but as a reminder, it's a more aggressive way of playing the piano, coming from kind of down and dirty bars and areas near factory towns in the early 20th century. A lot of left-hand work in honky-tonk piano. There is a strong backbeat, which then connects the song, of course, to the rock-fused element. The Western swing is the style we talked about also in Unit 1, a bigger band sound, and it really does have almost a connection to big band music in that sense. There's so many players to the Allman Brothers that we get that fullness. And really, this is about the freedom of life in general. It's a very uplifting song. So pause, go listen, and come on back. Welcome back. Our next act is also considered Southern rock. It is Lynyrd Skynyrd, and they have an interesting story behind the formation of their band name. The details I have read is that it was a high school, I think a gym coach or a gym teacher, who was named Lynyrd Skynyrd, probably spelled differently so they didn't get into trouble, who they didn't like. He was kind of a jerk apparently, and so they named their rock band after him. I sure hope I don't see a rock band named after me. That would make me feel sad. They also have a lot of the rock elements, and again, some argue is they're more rocks than they are Southern rock, but I think they do really straddle both categories quite a bit. The song Sweet Home Alabama has some of the same influences that the Allman Brothers did, some additional gospel influences by the use of some of their backup singers, but it's also a reply, a musical reply to a song by the great folk rock singer Neil Young. Neil Young has a song called Southern Man, where he's actually criticizing life in the South of America with some of its racial issues and some of its issues of poverty, but particularly racial issues. So in the lyric for Sweet Home Alabama, Lynyrd Skynyrd directly addresses that. So let's look at the lyric real quick. Pause to go listen. So these are some of the opening lyrics. It's not the entire lyric sheet for the song. And most of us may be familiar, if you know the song, with the beginning. But when we get to the second section, well, I heard Mr. Young sing about her. They're referring to the South as a woman. This is a poetic thing that's done frequently, like referring to a car. Isn't she a beauty? It's not meant to be sexist necessarily. It's an old-fashioned sort of poetic license thing. So I heard Mr. Young sing about her. Well, I heard old Neil put her down. Well, I hope Neil Young will remember a Southern man don't need him around anyhow. So it's not necessarily a hip-hop battle in lyrics, but it is definitely a rebuttal to the song Southern Man by Neil Young, which is not really a required song for us. If we were meeting in class, I usually discuss a little bit of the lyrics, but take a minute or two and go find it online, at least the lyrics for the Neil Young song, and see why Lynyrd Skynyrd felt the need to rebut him. So pause the video and come on back when you're done. We have another song by the Eagles. I put the beginning Eagles song first because it clearly has that connection to country music. The Eagles were very much into the Wild West. They have an entire album dedicated to a real Wild West gang, the Dalton Gang. But as their career progresses, they really do move a little bit. There's elements of what will be called progressive rock really in a song like Hotel California. But we are putting it firmly in the country rock category. What is also interesting is it kind of captures the disillusion of all the ideals of the 60s that never really came to be. It creates a bit of instability in its mysterious lyric content, its use of a minor key that also keeps us a little off kilter. And it's designed, as mentioned in the slide, to keep us wondering. You know, it's not an answered question here. It doesn't present California in that typical crunchy, shiny beach surf rock kind of way that we encountered maybe in the early 60s. It kind of shows the California, because we were one of the meccas of the hippie counterculture, is a bit mysterious now and a little bit scary. So the album is titled the same, and pause your video, come on back, and we'll go on to the next song in our unit. So in between some of our fused styles, we have this massive movement, really basically coming out of Great Britain, called glam rock. We want to be a little careful, although in our class we're lucky because I have put the heavy metal category in Unit 4. It's a bit underrepresented in our electronic textbook. but it is a free textbook, so I put it in Unit 4 so we wouldn't have so much of this conflict. There is a style of heavy metal called glam metal, but let's not worry about that now. We'll put that off until Unit 4. The Brits were experimenting with all kinds of ways to push the envelope. We've pushed it with extreme guitars in the 60s, distortion, feedback, all kinds of effects pedals, with all the counterculture elements, the fashion, the drug use, and everything else. How does somebody who's a performer push it into a new direction? Well, glam rock started to do some of that, blurring the lines between male and female, strutting around the stage like royalty in some cases. It's not a particular song form, it's more of a style with image very much connected to it. And even though that Elton John was mentioned in part 1 of this video series, David Bowie for sure definitely is kind of the poster artist for glam rock, at least his early career. If you know anything about David Bowie, he has lots of different image changes in the length of his career. He was struggling in the early days, not really certain what direction his career would go. And by the time he is recording Space Oddity, the space race going to the moon is fast and furiously happening. So it was really good timing that he had a piece of music in '68 about being in space. There are musical elements. Remember, a glissando is rapidly increasing the notes that you hear, like moving your fingers up the fretboard very quickly of a guitar as you play. On a piano, you are sliding your hand across all the keys. It creates that floating in space, moving up and down into space feeling. He also changes the key, the family of notes for the song, and that is called modulating. You can hear a little bit of that. Lots of effects on his voice to create a spacey, otherworldly feeling. And again, pause your video and come back and we'll go forward a little bit. Welcome back. Okay. The image that David Bowie created that really encapsulates the glam rock is a character called Ziggy Stardust. There he is, as Ziggy. He combined elements of kabuki theater with Nietzsche, all kinds of interesting philosophical ideas to create what he described as the ultimate mega rock star character. He really did immerse himself in this character a little too much. He at one point had to almost ceremoniously kill off the character he created because he was sort of mentally getting too deep into this life of living this life of Ziggy Stardust. Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is the album that the track is on, and it's a fictitious character who is a space alien ultimate mega rock star. That's the best way to sort of sum it up there. This is going to be a more hard rock sound than Space Oddity for sure, much more use of guitars. It is the themes of a sort of androgynous rock superstar that has interest in men and women and everybody in between. It really rocketed David Bowie, pun intended, to incredible stardom. But by the late 70s, he's going to completely strip it away. As I mentioned, he was very concerned. He was getting kind of too wrapped up into the character. And he will go to another image that people have called the plain white Duke. And that's just black and white suits and white dress shirts in a really stark kind of look to David Bowie. He will change that yet again through the 80s and then again in the 90s. He has a lot of different images. So pause your video, listen to Ziggy Stardust, and come on back. All right, we get into progressive rock, probably the biggest fused style of this particular time period. It is a fusion of classical music elements. In some cases, literally orchestras are used, like in the Moody Blues, late 60s. And we really have a carryover from some of the psychedelic rock and acid rock idea of the long sort of jam session that does influence some of this category in progressive rock. Some bands will use the formal design. That doesn't mean we showed up in a tuxedo. That's how a classical piece of music is designed, rather than a short pop song, a big structure like a symphony. Some bands will use fantasy lyrics. We see that in a number of cases. Genesis has some of that in their music. We have some occasional theatrics, actual things on the stage portrayed. Again, I go to Genesis for that. Pink Floyd has lots of theatrics. And again, that long jam sessions and lots of solos and lots of what was called virtuosic instrumental work. So our category is kind of dominated by the Brits for progressive rock. It actually kind of still isn't, to a certain extent. Probably the poster band for progressive rock is Pink Floyd. They really actually start out as more of a psychedelic band and acid rock band of the London scene, but quickly evolve into very long sessions, very treating their studio like an orchestra almost, and manipulating their sound. Their masterpiece album is considered Dark Side of the Moon, and there are excellent documentaries on the making of this album. There's a lot of YouTube things you can look up and find if you are interested in it. It has multiple different themes to it. The one song we have for our analysis is Money, which is kind of unusual. It has an unusual metrical makeup. It uses 7 beats. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We generally in music break up a long beat like that into 3 plus 4 or 3 plus 1, 2, 1, 2. And as you listen to it, you can hear that. They do have some blues involved with the song Money, so that's kind of an interesting thing. But really innovative for 73 was the use of a cash register sound and money sounds, what we today would probably call sampling, very early for that to be happening in 1973, though. And that becomes the riff of the beginning of the song. As they progress through this strange 7-beat pattern, by the time they get to what is the formal chorus, they go into traditional 4/4 meter, like a rock song. So it's a very interesting blend of more classically influenced elements and then rock and roll. So pause your video and come on back for some more Pink Floyd. Welcome back. Quite a bit later, 6 years later, the Pink Floyd fellas create a rock opera, a combination of operatic structure, storytelling, and of course using rock instruments and rock vocals. This is called The Wall. It's very autobiographical for Roger Waters, who is this man right here. Remember, British young people experienced awful things around the Second World War, the bombings of their cities and all kinds of things. So this was very autobiographical for Roger Waters, who lost his father during the war, and the desolation of the cities and the chaos. Imagine being a little kid or even a teenager would have been very frightening. It is a mixture of surrealistic lyrical elements addressing these themes of depression, anxiety, fear, mental illness. It's a big theme in Pink Floyd's music. There's lots of images in the film, which comes out quite a bit later, of wars, airplanes, isolation, and alienation. The film comes out in 1982. I have to warn everybody, it's pretty disturbing in a more of a psychological way than anything else. And given the state of maybe the way the life of all of us is right now, I might not recommend it as a viewing, but just make sure you're kind of emotionally grounded if you decide to rent it and view it. And some of you may have already seen it. Comfortably Numb is later in the story where this fictional character called Pink is losing his mind, basically, without giving up too much of the story. So pause your video, listen to Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd from 1979, and please come back. All right. What are these guys doing here? Didn't I say that I was going to do heavy metal in Unit 4? Yes, I did. But Zeppelin is such a unique situation, is that they have a third of their catalog is acoustic. They blend classical elements with rock and roll. Yes, they have a heavy sound in this particular track, Whole Lotta Love. In particular, listen to the low end of the riff, and it's very insistent. When I say insistent 8-note beat, that's one of the hallmarks of what becomes sort of a early heavy metal sound. The low range of the guitars being used, the soaring high-pitched vocals of Robert Plant. Here he is right there. And the use of the theremin, that's coming back to us. We heard some theremin in the Beach Boys, but it's used in a very different way for the middle section of Whole Lotta Love, which is the soloing section. There's all kinds of interesting studio manipulation. The lead guitarist is Jimmy Page. Get rid of that one and we'll get, let's go yellow for Jimmy Page. Oh, didn't like that one. There's Jimmy Page, who is an incredible guitarist, probably one of the best of rock history. Ooh, I can't draw circles with my mouse very well. He does all kinds of experimenting by using things like cello bows or violin bows on electric guitar. It's a pretty impressive thing to watch the man do his work. So pause your video, listen to a Whole Lotta Love, really rock out because this is a good one, and come back. Okay. Little more of Zepp before we move on. From 71, this one really does fit into the progressive rock category quite nicely. Stairway to Heaven is one of their most requested songs, even though it was never released as a single because Led Zeppelin refused to let their label do that, which was kind of unusual at the time. Led Zeppelin albums often are just numbered. Sometimes they're not. They don't stay consistent. This one is called Led Zeppelin 4, the album it is off of. Jimmy Page famously had to have a special guitar made that had a 6-string neck and a 12-string neck because live performance of this song didn't allow enough time for him to take off one guitar and put on another. The lyrics have a lot of controversy around them because of the Baptist church of the 80s was, I guess, searching for the devil in all kinds of places. Robert Plant is the lyric writer, and he says he wrote the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven in approximately 20 minutes, hardly long enough to have implanted any subliminal messages. He says it's based off of English and Celtic mythology. So pause your video, listen to Stairway to Heaven, and come back. And our last slide for this section, it is a tiny bit longer than the first part, but we have a lot to get through, is in a category called multicultural rock. It's been around, but it really becomes more mainstream and more popular in the 1970s. And one of the big leaders there is Carlos Santana, and his incredible band. The piece Oye Como Va, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it there, is written by a great percussionist, Tito Puente. Santana's version of it has a lot of the Afro-Cuban elements still present in it. You can hear the presence of a very prominent keyboard that's called a Hammond organ. Remember when we heard from Stevie Wonder and he had that clavinet keyboard? Well, Hammond has a very specific sound too. We have other multicultural instruments in it. The go-go bells are what are pictured here. Let me see if I can get a little arrow there. And I believe it's pronounced gyro. It has different names in different parts of the world. And let's put that one in blue. Is this? Whoop, can't draw a circle. And you run this stick over the surface of these ridges, and it creates a very distinct sound. You can also hear claves, if I'm not correct, in this particular song. You've got congas, which are these. So pause your video, listen to Oye Como Va by Santana, and this is our last slide of part 3. So I'll see everybody in part 4.